Hello, Line Cook Nation. This is Ray DeLucci with the Line Cook Thoughts podcast. Hope everyone is doing well and hope everyone is staying safe. Today is number 150 of our podcast, of the podcast I started almost 3 years ago. And I just want to start out by saying thank you all so much for listening, for supporting, for going along with this show. Like I said, it's almost been 3 years in the making now. And to be able to do this so many times again and again and to have people enjoy it, people listen to it, people follow it has really been an honor and a privilege. Just from day one, starting out and just figuring out how to do a podcast to now to being able to do video and being able to interview the guests I've gotten to interview and tell the stories I've gotten to share and to go over the topics that I've gotten to kind of dive deep into. It really has meant a ton. And this brand is what I love the most in regards to what I do. It's something that I'm always focused on, always working on, whether it be the writing, whether it be the social media aspects of Instagram or TikTok or Facebook or Twitter, or whether it be the podcast or the video. So, first off, thank you all so much for listening to this episode. If you've listened to all 150, I give you a lot of credit for wanting to hear my voice so many times. But thank you so much for just being there and being able to listen to all this stuff about the food industry and wanting a different perspective on maybe an industry that isn't as common. This idea that maybe the industry can be better and we can be more supportive and we can talk about things such as mental health and why it is we pursued certain things in the industry, and maybe if the reasons we pursue certain things in the industry are flawed, or if they're not good for us, or if they're maybe just have been put on us, and maybe we haven't asked ourselves why we certainly want to go after an award or a rating, or so that's really what I love about this show. That's really what I love about having different opinions on, and it's really what I love about the brand. I love the idea that we can share and we can talk as a community and that we're able to share different perspectives, share different ideas, and just share how we feel and what our thoughts are on the industry. And I know we all don't agree with each other a lot on certain things, but I think we all have this collective want to make the industry better because we all respect and cherish what we have in this industry. So I just want to say thank you before we begin episode 150. It's kind of crazy that I've gotten to this point. I'm so grateful, and just thank you so much. I wanted to do a solo episode for 150 because I think it's important as we have gone through the pandemic, as my life has changed drastically since March 2020, as I'm sure a lot of your lives have changed, just from COVID and everything that's been going on in the world. And I wanted to talk about this two things, patience and giving up. And I wanted to start out with giving up. I wrote a blog post this last month about giving up. And basically the whole idea behind the blog post is just looking at my own story of giving up and then what that kind of means in the restaurant industry, because in our industry we're taught so much that giving up is the worst thing you can possibly do. Letting go is not something we are trained to do. We are trained to go in and finish our prep list. Nothing is left. Nothing cannot be prepped on our prep list. We're trained to put every plate in the pass in a certain amount of time. We're not to exceed that time limit. We're taught to hit a certain food cost. We're taught to hit a certain labor cost, bar cost. We're taught to have our food look great every single time. There's no room for giving up. There's no room for lenience. There always has to be the standard. And I think we all strive to have a standard in our lives, professionally and personally, for what we are and who we want to be. But giving up also sometimes can be beneficial, and letting go can be beneficial. And I think a lot of times in this industry, we don't let go enough and we don't focus on ourselves enough to the point where we see any sort of decision that we make in regards to our own self-care. And, if that decision involves letting go of something, we see that as a failure, or we see that as something that is not good. And so for 150, I didn't want to have an interview. I didn't want to really dive into a kitchen topic per se, but more so a kitchen idea or a couple kitchen ideas, because a lot of you have reached out to me over the past few months, and I've been posting content. I post my Twitter feed sometimes on the Instagram, and that content does really well. And I think it does really well is because I try to tap into what people in the restaurant industry are telling me right now and what people are trying to talk about. And so, for example, I said I'm going to talk about patience later. I posted this on November 14th, and I basically said, patience for where you are right now. No chef or cook in decades has had to face what we are going through. This is so new, and there is a lot we simply have not processed. Control what you can control while you continue to maneuver through such an unpredictable time. And that got a lot of likes. It got a lot of interaction, a lot of shares. And I bring that up in this giving up section is because we have to keep in mind, I think we have very short memories sometimes in food. that we are in an unprecedented time, as much as that's been said. And there's so much going on still that is not has not been faced by anyone in the last 100 years or so in restaurants, and really ever, because we're in such a niche time with social media and the pandemic, and the whole idea of restaurants and what they mean and where they're going and how they should be. And not even just restaurants, but just food in general. As you all know, I don't work in restaurants anymore. I work more so in a research and development role now. And just the whole food industry has turned, and people are going into different roles, different sectors. And I really do see this broadening and just like this awakening of this idea that, wow, if I cook, I can also do X, Y, and Z. And so to start out by giving up, I think it's important to just realize that we put a lot of weight in words that are like giving up or letting go. But really, it's just this idea that what is feasible for you anymore. I think that's the biggest thing for me is like, what is still feasible for you? So I'll give you an example of giving up. Yeah, so like when the pandemic started, I was not comfortable with having to go work in a restaurant that I was working in. Or I wasn't comfortable in having to move if I had lost my job, and so I decided to take time away and go be with family. And that decision led me to not work for 8 months. No one had really understood what the restaurant industry was going to be. No one really understood where we were going. I don't think I would have ever predicted that I'd be out of work for 8 months, and I don't ever think anyone could have predicted that the restaurant industry would go the way it went. But I made this decision to not work in restaurants during that time, and to be with family because of how unprecedented the time was. And to make that decision was tough. It took me like a week and a half. I was anxious. I couldn't sleep. I had fatigue from it. Like, it really was a tough decision. I remember like the pandemic was hitting. I was working. I was supposed to be at work. I took a little bit of time off because I was like, man, like I had to go away from family for work, and like I was not where I was usually living. I had to go and travel elsewhere. And it really was important to me to be with the people I loved during that time. And it was really important for me to kind of take a step back and not work myself to the bone. I think that was like the biggest decision during the pandemic. Up until that point, I've been working so much, as everyone does in the restaurant industry. I was managing a kitchen. I was working a ton of hours, one day off type, scenarios sometimes. And to be, thrust into a pandemic with all these issues of public health and uncertainty, and what was going to happen, and what did restaurants even look like at that time. I made the decision to just give myself some time to figure out my own life before getting back out there, to figure out my own shit. And it really was a tough decision, and it was something that took, it wasn't an easy decision after the fact either. Having to give up restaurants during the pandemic was tough. Having to give that up really was tough because I have a love for restaurants. I have a love for cooking. I have a love for being in the industry. I mean, that's all I did up until the pandemic, and it was all I was ever really good at. I thought, it was just something that I thought I was. Restaurants for me were just like the thing I was good at, and I wanted to stick with them and be with them forever. And when the pandemic hit, like many people, I got this shock of like, wait, like there's also other important things besides work out there. There's like family. There's making sure I'm okay. There's making sure that I'm in a good spot, in a good situation. And so having to, move during the pandemic and then realize that the job I had wasn't really for me, and that it wasn't really suiting what I needed at that time, which was to go be with family elsewhere and be with the ones I loved elsewhere. That decision was tough, but it ended up being a net positive. It got me into what I do now. Gave me time to process a lot of things. It gave me time to take into account my mental health and to take into account, some self-care for myself. And it was very tough. It was very tough for sure. Like I said, when the pandemic started, my restaurant closed and I had to go elsewhere. And when I went elsewhere, it just wasn't the fit for me. And it was but I had this idea. I was like, oh my God, you're like giving up. You're letting go. You're doing something you never do. And that was like the biggest thing, is like giving up is not something I ever wanted to do. It's not something I ever planned on doing. And when I did that, it was like, whoa, like who am I? Am I changing? Am I a different person? Am I wrong for doing this? And I think we are so conditioned in this industry to think that way. If we take time for ourselves, if we ask for a day off, if we need to go do something, we're always like, I remember, I still have it. If I take a time off at work, it's like, in my mind, this isn't anyone else, this is me. Like, I'm just like, oh man, like, is my boss going to be mad at me? Or I feel bad, or I feel like I should be there. And it shows you care. It shows you care about your work. It shows you care about what you're doing. It shows that you care about um, the the place you're at. But it also is not normal. It shouldn't be the norm. When we take time off, when we ask for time away from our jobs, we shouldn't feel guilty. We shouldn't feel as if we are letting someone down, because at the end of the day, life exists outside of work. And I think that's like the biggest thing that I had to learn um, through the pandemic and over the last few years. I would feel so guilty taking off one day after working like a month and a half um, before the pandemic. And it was just like, it was crazy. It's like one day off, like to go take care of a doctor's visit or go take care of like my car's title or something like that. It wasn't anything like crazy. I wasn't going to like internationally travel. It was just like the craziest thing. So I'm saying this all to say that we have this weird relationship with giving up. We have this weird relationship of letting go. We have this weird relationship in the food industry with taking time away. And I think for giving up, I want to just stress that like not every time you give up is a failure. Not every time you give up is bad. If you give up a toxic relationship, that is good. If you give up a bad habit, that is also good. And I'm not saying that that's what kitchens are, but I'm saying that that can be where some people are. And making a transition, leaving a spot, going somewhere else, or going into another sector of the industry it's not a bad thing. It's not a sign that you're weak. It's not a sign that you couldn't cut it. It's not a sign that you're not a good chef or a good cook or anything. And I think that's an important point, is when we talk about, if you're a good chef, like that's all ego. All that stuff is ego. There's no bearing on what any of that means. When people say they're leaving restaurants, or they feel like they're an imposter because they want to leave restaurants to go try something else, and they're worried that people are going to say that they can't cut it, or that they're not good enough, or that they're just lazy, or that they don't have the work ethic. That's all ego. That is all something that we've made up in our heads that we think people are saying. The reality is most people don't really care. Most people don't give a shit. And the people that do care, I mean, it's very few, probably, and anyone in your life that is really actually supportive of you and in your corner will be supportive and should be supportive if you want to make a positive change for yourself. But we're so caught in our own egos sometimes. And trust me, I probably have the biggest ego out of anyone I know. I mean, I run a podcast and all this stuff. But that idea that, oh, people are going to judge us, or people are going to say we're lazy or we're weak or we can't cook, or all this stuff is it's just such bullshit. It's wrong. It's not true. It's not what we should think about. Letting others' opinions dictate how we maneuver in the food industry is not good. It's not okay. And like I said, most of the time people don't even care what you're doing. They don't care. So just do what makes you happy. Do what you feel is best, because listening to all of that inner talk that's negative, that's just it's holding you back from being who you want to be. It's not good for you, and it's going to just lead to a lot of unhappiness, and it will hold you back from what you want to do in your career. I think we hold ourselves back so much more than we realize. I do, you do, all of us do. We hold ourselves back so much. And this idea that, oh, because I'm giving up a job, or I'm giving up restaurants for a little bit, it doesn't have to be give up. You could just be taking a break. You could be trying something new. You could be letting go for a little bit to go do something else. And I think that goes into my second point of letting go, is not every decision you make is permanent. If you leave restaurants for a year and you want to go try research and development and find out you hate it, you want to go try grocery and you hate it, you can always go back to restaurants. There's not this like permanent pathway in food. And I think so many of us don't realize this. If we leave a restaurant, it's not as if, oh, we can't just go work in restaurants ever again. Like, no, like that's not the case. You can go work elsewhere, get those experiences you wanted, and still come back if you realize that you love restaurants. And it might be that time away from cooking that shows you, hey, I really do love being on the line. I really do love being in restaurants. And so I think that's also an important point. No decision you make is like an infinite final decision. And there's no way you'd ever know the other side of a decision you make. So making those decisions that are best for you are always in your best interest, because it lets you experience new things. It lets you get through life a little bit easier in terms of like your own want and need to be curious. And it lets you just live kind of life on your terms, and lets you live life according to your path. We're taught so much that there's only, in my opinion, we're taught so much that there's only one path in food. And it's for me, it's that you need to achieve this high status of cooking. It doesn't necessarily mean it needs to be like white tablecloth. We're always taught that we need to achieve this high status of cooking. Um, but for a lot of people, like that's not what some people want. Like some people want to try new things. Some people want to manage operations. Some people want to write in food. Some people want to do food photography. Some people want to go into food safety and make sure that food is safe for customers to eat. There's so many different outlets out there, and there's so many different niche jobs that so many different people in kitchens would be good at. But we're only taught that we need to aspire or strive to do this one thing. And yeah, letting go is fine. Letting go is okay. And letting go should be something we are able to do in food. Going back to the idea of taking a day off or needing to transition to a new job, it shouldn't be this, like, when we make this decision, it should be on how we feel and what's best for us. It shouldn't be, oh, I'm so worried about what others think, or, oh, like, this job is like, I owe it to my job. Like, a job's a job. And that's like the next point we need to talk about is, for working in food, I think what a lot of people realize in the pandemic is like a job is a job. But if you haven't realized that, like, here's another wake up call, or here's another reminder that it is just a job. You're going to have another one. You're not going to be at this one forever. We put so much weight in our professional lives. We don't take enough time to go outside and make ourselves, like, we don't take enough time to be ourselves outside of work when we're in the food industry. And I've always pushed for this idea of having a side project or having something to work on. I'm not talking about like having like a social media project. I'm just a side project, learning guitar, knitting. I mean, I don't know, whatever interests you. Having a garden outside on your balcony or out in your front lawn, whatever it is, but having something that takes you away from always thinking about food. Because at the end of the day, all of that constant pressure, that constant focus is what can bring you down. And that's coming from someone who's been there. I only focused on managing restaurants for 2 years or a year and a half that I did it. And I can tell you that while I was very successful in, going from just being in training to running my own kitchen, it was very taxing. It was very tough, and it was very hard to do. It was a very hard situation to be in the restaurant industry. That goes into being a cook and always being focused on what I need to do as a line cook, and having a prep list that I would look at home before I went to bed. I'm not saying you shouldn't think about work outside of work, but you definitely should take that time away from work. We get into very unhealthy relationships with jobs. We get into very unhealthy relationships with work, and I just think it's very easy to fall into that trap of always caring about work. And I also think it's kind of a crutch. I think it's easy sometimes to always care about work, in a sense that, if we're too busy to go see friends, or we're too busy to go do something because we have to focus on work, when in reality, we're just not putting that effort in as well. I know for me, for a lot of time, I'd always use work as an excuse to not see people or not do certain things. And that's because I was stressed. I was anxious. I didn't have that mental capacity to do so. And that's nothing wrong with that, but just recognizing that you're in that space is the biggest part. And that was something I really neglected for a long time. My own mental health, my own anxiety, my own need to actually be fulfilled outside of what my job offered me. So that's all I'm giving up. That's all I'm letting go. And yeah, if you can relate to that in any way, I'd love to hear it. If you have any thoughts, if you disagree, obviously this is an open community to talk about all this stuff, but giving up isn't necessarily bad. Letting go is a part of life. It's a part of work, and it's important. All right, I want to talk about patience next, because I'm the most impatient person that I probably know. Patience sucks. It really is terrible. It's something that it's something I need practice on, because I think in this industry it's so quick, right? Especially in restaurants. If you do really well, you can move up really quickly in a restaurant. Or if you're in a very fast-paced environment, you can get moved around. And so I think it's very important to have this patience. And maybe this is just a self-talk to myself, and you're all just listening to this podcast and listening to me rant and kind of pep myself up on this. But patience is so important right now. It's so important. I don't even want to say that. We are still in the pandemic, and it looks like numbers are getting worse again. And to right now have any sense of like, oh my God, I'm behind in life. Oh my God, like, what am I doing? Like, let's go back to that idea that no one else has faced this before. in our lifetime, and we're all figuring this shit out. We should not be comparing ourselves to any other time period. We should not be comparing ourselves to chefs from 2 decades ago or a decade ago or even 5 years ago in their career path, their projection, their growth. Um, this is totally different, right? And being patient is so important right now. It's super important because and what I've learned is you don't ever want to make decisions in a rush, right? And it's very easy to get caught in this trap, this unhappiness thing that we all go where, oh, I wish I was farther in life. I wish I had more money. I wish I had more, um, just, more of everything. I wish I was just further along. I wish I had progressed more. I wish I would have done something differently. And I just wish things were moving faster. We have to remember that a year ago, our whole industry was on standby. We have to remember that there's supply chain issues. There's still systemic issues in our industry. We have to remember that there's so much changing right now with food, with what it means to be a chef, what it means to be working in the restaurant industry, what it means to be working in the food industry, what it means to work with food at all, where it's going, the new concepts, the new ideas, stuff outside of our industry that's probably going to affect it at some point. Whether it be like ghost kitchens or NFTs, whatever is going on. There's so much going on. There's so much noise. There's so much out there, right? Patience is super important right now. Where you're at right now is where you're meant to be. Where you're at right now is fine. It's good. It's okay. We all have time to do this thing. And, this isn't to be mistaken as being complacent. Complacency is where you're just fine and you're not pushing for, I think complacency, it's to be complacent is just be like okay with where you're at and just be okay with what you're doing. And I think a lot of us are not that way at all. I think if you listen to this show, you also want to push for something more. You also want to exceed in what you're doing, exceed in your goals, exceed in what it is that you are passionate about. So having patience right now is, I think, fundamental. It's important. It's needed and it's necessary because without patience, this whole thing is going to be very tough. Because restaurants might shut down again. That's the reality. If cases keep getting worse, that could be a reality. I'm not saying that's going to happen. I don't want that to happen. That could be a reality. The supply chain could get worse, and we might not have certain things to work with. Other jobs in the industry might shut down. There's so many different things that could happen. And to have this negative self-talk right now of, oh, I'm not as far as I should be, or I'm not as, good as I should be at certain things with work. Like I said, we literally just had a year where everyone was on standby, not just in the restaurant industry, but in the world. We had a year where nothing was normal. We had a year where everything stood still. And to kind of forget that and to keep this negative self-talk of I need to be further, I need to do better, I need to be farther along is not okay. It's not something that you should be doing. It's not something that anyone should be doing. And that's including myself. And it's a big point to myself of what I need to work on. We need to be all right that this is where we are right now. And we need to have that hope and we need to have that clarity that we do have that power to change and that agency to move forward in our careers, and that whatever happens over the next few years is what's going to happen. And we're going to have to do the best with what we've got. There's this, the idea that returning to normal, that was a big thing, right? Getting back to normalcy. There is no normal. This is the normal. We can only work within what we do. I love stoicism a lot. I love the idea of the obstacle is the way, or what is in the way, becomes the way. It is what it is, however you want to say it. This idea that whatever happens, happens, and that's our path, and that's where we got to keep moving forward. And I know this podcast is called Line Cook Thoughts, and I don't mean to go all philosophical, and you could totally be like, well, what the hell is Ray talking about right now? And that's totally fine. Episode 150, and here we are. But I've learned so much over the last year about myself in regards to how impatient and how unrealistic my whole view of food and life were. Especially if you're young in the industry. It doesn't need to be everyone who's young, but I'm 24 and I'm like, oh my God, why am I not farther ahead with work? Or how come Line Cook Thoughts isn't have 1 million followers? Or how come this podcast doesn't have 1 million listeners? And it's just this stuff takes time. Things take time. Good things take time. We know this. Think about making a stock, thinking about a recipe. Same concept. It takes time to make something good. If you just if If you were to just put bones in a pot and boil them for 20 minutes, that would be a shitty stock. To simmer that low for hours to make this beautiful liquid that you can then cook with and impart flavor with. Same thing with our lives, same thing with our careers. It takes time. It takes time to build that. It takes time to um, get moving forward. It takes time to get those skills to maneuver, to do something new. And so, this whole patience idea is so, so, so important right now. And I think when we can get patience into our lives, it lets us focus on who we are, and it lets us be okay with what we're doing in food. It lets us be okay with the path we're going, and it gives us some time to think. If we're always rushing, if we're always trying to get to the next thing, we don't have any time to breathe, step back, and like, okay, like this is what I want to do now, or maybe this is where I need to redirect my path. So just being patient, being honest with yourself, and just being okay with where you are right now, and being proud that you made it through this. Like I mean, I can't imagine. I feel very blessed. None of my family got sick during the pandemic. Everyone was okay. That's how I feel blessed about. Like honesty, like yes, it was tough not working for 8 months. Yes, it sucked having to use a lot of my savings to move back into my house. Yes, it sucked to you know not not have work or to just kind of just be there for 8 months and to deal with the stuff I had to deal with. But that is so small in comparison to like my family's health, my friends' health, the people I love being okay. I feel blessed during this time because everyone's been okay, and I know so many people have had it so, so, so much worse. And it's not a competition of who had it worse or better, but it's all to say that like we all have our perspective and our perception on things. We have a perception on how things are. We have our perception on how we're going to react to our situation. And I think it's just really important to take that perception and to be proud that you've maneuvered through this, that you've made it through this. It's like sitting back and be like, holy shit, like what the hell actually just happened the last year and a half? Like if you actually sat down and thought about everything that happened in your life the last year and a half, I feel like you'd be like, oh yeah, I definitely like am kind of proud of myself for making it through every single thing that happens. So patience is key. It's important. It's why like so many of you reacted to that post. It's because being patient right now and giving ourselves that permission to be like, we are where we need to be. We're proud of where we need to be, and we need to keep moving forward is so important. And without it, we're not going to get anywhere. So super important. Please be patient to yourself. And remember, letting go is okay. Remember, giving up isn't always a failure. And that's what I want to really impart in episode 150. I think a big part of Line Cook Thoughts is mental health awareness, self-care, being okay with who we are, being okay with the decisions we make, recognizing there's so much in this industry to go after. I think a big chunk of what I don't talk about is the idea of giving up or the idea of patience and the idea of just being okay with where we are right now and recognizing that there's never that, what I think I'm learning is like, there's never going to be that tipping point where things get easier or where we're always going to have these feelings of self-doubt, of imposter syndrome, of not being good enough. And we need to cultivate, like no job's ever going to give us that feeling that will make those ideas or those thoughts go away. No position, no accolade, no awards ever going to give us that freedom to say, all right, we're not an imposter now, or all right, we don't suck now. We're always going to feel that way. At least I know I will. I've never met anything in my life. I've never done anything in my life that has made me feel like that has quieted the negative thoughts that come. So being okay with that, being able to be in your own corner, being patient with where you are, I think is super important. Just a reminder that you can, go to linecookthoughts.com. We have our official blog. We also sell our official merchandise there, so feel free to check that out. My whole article on giving up is on there from last month. I really, really, really hope you all check it out and read it. I really put a ton of work into it. I actually wrote it on a flight that I was on. A flight got delayed for like 8 hours, and I wrote this article because it was just something I was super passionate about, and so I really hope you enjoy it. Also, if you're listening on Apple, please leave a review. It does not need to be a 5-star review, but just an honest review of the show. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit the like button and subscribe. I just want to say so much again. Thank you, thank you, thank you from the bottom of my heart for listening to this podcast. This podcast means a ton to me. It's so much work for me in a good way. So much about what I care about. It's a legacy I want to leave behind. And I know you have, like, I have on my phone too. I have podcasts I listen to. It's like, oh, cool. I get to listen to a podcast, but so much goes into it, so much care, so much thought, and just so much what I feel like is just me being willing to just sometimes be like super personal with these things that I never would have done before without it. So, and to get to these places, these ideas that I probably never would have reached without this show and without this community and without all of you listening. So, thank you all so much. Please share this episode if you thought it helped you in any way. Really excited for the next few interviews coming up. Really excited to get to 200 for this podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you on the next Line Cook Thoughts podcast.